wonder what it feels like to be a white liberal American right now, because despite your best efforts, Trump got a second term, ICE is roaming the streets, the National Guard has been deployed to Washington, D.C., you've tariffed the entire world, and you're supporting a genocide. Not supporting, you're enabling it. So I wonder, if you are a white liberal American, how you feel. And if that were ever put into words or put on film, what would that be like? I think to come close to what that feeling is, turn to a movie like Eddington, Ari Aster's latest. I am in no way trying to belittle this man, because I have great respect for him as a filmmaker. And he doesn't need me to say that. His work shines through. Hereditary and Midsummer are seminal feats in the horror genre, and they will go down, I think, not even just for the 2020s or the 2000s, but I mean as some of the greatest horror films ever made. Fantastic work. And again, for a director to do sort of a 1-2, sort of a double tap, Hereditary followed by Midsummer, it's amazing. I will admit I avoided Beau is Afraid, starring Joaquin Phoenix, his third feature, simply because I think, I don't know, there was something about the premise of the movie that didn't appeal. But when it came to Eddington, his latest, also starring Joaquin Phoenix, Pedro Pascal, Austin Butler, Emma Stone, I was intrigued, because this movie is, how would one describe it, like a dystopian sort of dramedy, dystopian black comedy, something of the sort that, if done well, would have been great. But unfortunately, I think that the director should have stayed in his wheelhouse. This is the Last Picture Show with A.Rahim Khan, and I'll be reviewing Eddington today. A movie that many of you may not have watched, but a movie that I thought that was worth reviewing, because I think it tries to make sense of what 2020, the year that 2020 was. Unless you were living under a rock, or God forbid you actually contracted COVID and you have long COVID and you've forgotten what 2020 was. Well, of course, you had the global pandemic that was COVID. And if then you were in America, you had Black Lives Matter, with, of course, the death of George Floyd. You had Trump. You had anti-vaxxers. You had anti-maskers, if that's even, I think, the term that they use for themselves. You had conspiracy theories abounding. And you just generally had a time where, thanks to social media, thanks to this interconnectedness that we have, we were all privy to this madness, but it was all quite remote. For those of us who were not in America, it was interesting seeing this dumpster fire being lighted and then just conflagrating and then just going out of control. That's, I think, what Eddington attempts to do. It tries to put into, well, not words, but put onto film what it must have been like now that we are here in 2025. It's almost nostalgia. What it must have been like to live during that time. And I think in America it must have been, well, for want of a better word, it must have been crazy. And I think it definitely was. The film is about this small town in New Mexico where the sheriff, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is having to put up with a not all there wife, played by Emma Stone. He then also has to put up with a town, a sort of a one-dog town, literally, that is presided over by Mayor Pedro Pascal. And in all of this, you have COVID, which Joaquin Phoenix character is firmly of the camp that he does not believe in it, or even if he does believe in it, it does not exist in this town, and thus he is completely against, sort of all of those SOPs about sort of social distancing and masks and, well, vaccines weren't even around at that time, but sort of like, you get the gist of who this person is. And so he decides to run against Pedro Pascal, who is the mayor, in the upcoming election. Pascal's character, of course, he plays the mayor who is interested in bringing a big data farm into New Mexico, into what's it called, their little town. It'll sort of boost the economy, of course, but then people are concerned that having all of this, these servers and stuff like that will sort of, suck up all of the water from the very dry New Mexican desert. So that's, of course, the premise. The film is a comment, of course, on contemporary American society. I mean, it's as much about guns as it is about sort of like, the right to protest, the right to free speech, what's it called, that sort of American way of sort of like, allowing for all of sort of these disparate voices to at least sort of coexist, or at least that's what we're always told. That is a country, as to quote Voltaire, that I may not agree with you, but I will defend to the death your right to say it, to paraphrase him. So I mean, sort of at least ostensibly, that is what America purports to be. That you may be someone completely on the fringe, you may be somebody who does not believe in COVID or social distancing, but again, you have as much of a right as somebody who does. Cool, okay. But then, where I feel, and there's a number of reasons where I feel this movie failed, but where I feel that this movie does not perhaps achieve that tone of satire, is that, and I remember having this conversation with somebody who was completely dismissive of Trump voters, themselves an American, and saying that, oh, no, those people don't have the right. They were being very dismissive. They don't have the right to, sort of have a say in this sort of national, in this debate, in this conversation that we're having. And that conversation, of course, leads to how this country is being sort of steered. I think it was that very attitude that led to perhaps Trump's first term and even Trump's second term. I mean, sort of like, if the Democrats appear as, sort of these exemplars, not Biden, of course, not Genocide Joe, but if they appear as, again, these exemplars of true American values, unlike Republicans who are just now considered like, weird, like who are just considered to be so perhaps old-fashioned and conservative, that they're almost comical. The Democrats, on the other hand, have yet to prove worthy of any titles. So I think that is where this movie, at least thematically, introduces these characters, but it does so without, I think, a semblance of sympathy or understanding. I mean, you just have Joaquin Phoenix character who, at least initially, comes off as somebody who's clearly out of his depth, as sheriff, as husband, as, potential mayoral candidate. But then, I mean, it takes this dark turn where sort of, and spoilers, he goes on this bloody rampage. So while, I mean, there is that sort of theme running, of course, then you have the introduction of, sort of what happens to George Floyd and the subsequent BLM protests that sparked sort of a global condemnation. And you have that sort of, in this microcosm of Eddington, it becomes this sort of, petri dish almost of all of these problems that are sort of afflicting America, both back in 20 as well as now. And even when you have, for example, the protesters who are out there on the street, again, in this town that barely has, I think, what's it called, one like high street. I mean, sort of like, they have, just literally one high street. You have these protesters there, and they are, sort of shouting themselves hoarse about sort of Black Lives Matter and whatnot. Even that, I think, reaches this point where it goes from, just not taking them seriously, where you think that it rings so hollow. I mean, you hear so much about sort of white privilege, where there's one particular character about sort of like, how we're on stolen land, how, sort of what happened to George Floyd was wrong. And of course, all of that is true. Those are facts. But I mean, I think it's written in a way where sort of there is even no sympathy even for the left. So at least in that regard, he does paint them with the same brush. There is this sort of wariness of both sides. But one thing that really doesn't help this movie is the length. It clocks in at almost 2.5 hours. I mean, when a movie is that long, it loses its edge, especially when you're not, when you are sort of dealing with a film that isn't sort of action, that isn't sort of, doesn't have these peaks or valleys. Like, for example, do you remember The Brutalist? And we've reviewed that here on the last picture show. That was a movie that I think almost clocked in at the same time, or almost was pushing 3 hours. Now, that was sort of an epic, even though there's, I mean, sort of, it's essentially about architecture and the American dream. But that was a movie that sort of justified its runtime and engaged you throughout the entire length. This movie, I mean, you tend to feel that there are scenes that just tend to drag on, and you're like, for God's sake, I mean, cut. Why didn't you call cut? I mean, we have a character that's introduced that's almost Alex Jones-like, and he's played by, creepily enough, by Austin Butler. And he's introduced, and there's this scene in which Joaquin Phoenix's wife, played by Emma Stone, brings him over to the house, and there's this conversation going on between the woefully inept Joaquin Phoenix and Austin Butler's character. And it just goes on, and I'm like sitting there and I'm wondering, I mean, sort of, brevity is the soul of wit. I mean, where is Ari Aster's brevity here? And I mean, this goes for many scenes. This goes for, I would say, almost half of the scenes that they just tend to drag. And that's where I think the film, if it ever were to have a message, even if he wasn't aiming for that, even if he was just aiming for, let me comment, let me even sort of like, just put it on display. This was a year in our life. If that is the case, I just think that sort of what this movie suffers from, and what eventually undoes this entire enterprise, is its length. The finale of the movie, as I said, I mean, Joaquin Phoenix's character goes on this sort of bloody rampage, and he ends up going up against, I think, Antifa or something like that, because you have to put those guys in it too. I mean, or were they Proud Boys or something, or some sort of militant group? They descend upon the town, and apparently they want to kill him. And sort of then it becomes this almost gun porn moment where he's unloading a machine gun into sort of the main street of this little town. And that was wild physically, because I mean, you have him, Joaquin Phoenix, and he does a great job. He does a great job as this character. He sort of literally, he races across the entire town. That was wild. And I think besides him, nobody else really does. I mean, Pedro Pascal is barely there. For a man who's literally in everything, I mean, he's not used judiciously here. And by that, I mean, he's like in a scene, then he'll disappear, then a scene which you think he should have been in, he's not there, then he's back. So I think maybe he was shooting this back to back with something else. Either way, I think the only person who this movie is a vehicle for is Joaquin Phoenix, who does exactly what is expected of him. But unfortunately, it's just in a movie that I think the director, Ari Aster, should have consigned to the trash heap of history, as they say. It shouldn't have been one story that should have seen the light of day. I think that he should stick to his wheelhouse, which is horror. And I mean, sort of, if you want to skip through this entire review and end it here at the end, not a movie I would recommend.